Good afternoon, and thank you for your attention. I want to start by reminding everyone of the golden rule. Treat others how you want to be treated. 8 simple words comprise this phrase, and yet the task appears to be so difficult. Treat others as you want to be treated. As I'm speaking to you today, I ask that you think about the golden rule and how, if it was applied, would change the outcome for the better. Mr. Spady, your beard is too robust. Miss Perry, your hair is too thick. Miss Hussain, your hair is too curly. How did that make you feel? Caught off guard? Defensive? Uncomfortable? Imagine feeling like that every day when you walk out of your home, knowing that you will be judged due to a physical characteristic you possess. Think about the anxiety that places on you. Think about how you have to be calculated in every move you make to either combat or prepare yourself for the criticism and scrutiny coming your way. Mr. Spady, Miss Perry, Miss Hussain, you are all adults. Think about how the pressure would affect you as a teenager. We are about 6 weeks away from what would have been our graduation, a day we have longed for since 1L year. And for some of us, we didn't know if May 9, 2020 would ever come. We are all too familiar with the inability to walk and participate in a graduation that we have worked so hard for. But close your eyes and imagine that school officials and not a health pandemic prevented you from getting dressed in your cap and gown, walking across the stage, shaking the school administration's hands, accepting your diploma, taking pictures with family and friends, and sharing this proud day on social media. Everything you dreamed of since the first day of 1L year taken away in an instant. Not because of an international pandemic, but because, Mr. Spady, your beard is too robust. Miss Perry, your hair is too thick. And Miss Hussain, your hair is too curly. Unfortunately, for high school senior DeAndre Arnold, his reality is that he may not be able to return to school, let alone graduate, because he refuses to cut his dreadlocks. Slide 2. Arnold, now a senior, has been growing his dreadlocks since 7th grade and went his entire high school career with his dreadlocks. Yet and still, in December of his senior year, he was told he had to cut his dreadlocks. And if he refused to do so, then he would be suspended and forced to go to an alternative school to finish his high school career. Now, we have somewhat of an idea what it's like to be deprived of an honor we rightfully earned. But to be deprived of an honor because of a physical characteristic is unimaginable. Slide 3. I ask you to think now about a child you know, or think back to a younger you. And imagine asking this child, how was school today? What did you learn? And the response being, we learned about slavery, and I was cast as a slave. Now, for some, that may not seem problematic. However, slide 4. If it were the only 2 African American children in the class being cast as a slave That's a big problem. Not only is it racist, but it's culturally insensitive. One of the parents of the African American children cast as a slave made a statement, and a very good point. The Holocaust was a very tragic and disheartening time. Not only would it be disrespectful and culturally insensitive, it would be flat out wrong to have a Holocaust play where children is cast as imprisoned Jew 1 and imprisoned Jew 2 to simulate dying in the gas chamber. So why is it okay, acceptable, permissible to allow the only two African American students to be cast as enslaved African 1 and enslaved African 2? Imagine the stigma attached to this. The only black students in the class being labeled enslaved African 1 and enslaved African 2. The reason some think it is okay, acceptable, permissible to cast the only two African American students as slaves is due to the cultural insensitivity to the African American culture in America. How many times have there been news stories about blackface, modern day racism, memorializing Confederate generals and soldiers? Slavery, racism, and the Holocaust were all tragedies. One is not more significant or problematic than the other. Each tragedy was spewed by hate, intolerance, and ignorance. Each deserves the respect and recognition of the tragedy that occurred, and society should not mock or belittle the significance of any of the tragic events, whether done intentionally or unintentionally. Slide 5. We've spent 3 years in law school and have been challenged to speak out against injustice. We've been taught that those who commit crimes have fundamental rights that should not be infringed upon. We're all very familiar with hypotheticals, so I pose the following hypo to you. Mr. McGill engages in legal activity to practice his religious beliefs. Mr. McGill becomes incarcerated and wishes to continue practicing his religion. As a result of legally practicing his religion, Mr. McGill is placed in solitary confinement for more than a year, 365 plus days, for legally practicing his religion. As a result of solitary confinement, Mr. McGill has suffered from anxiety attacks 2 to 3 times per week. Additionally, part of being in solitary means Mr. McGill gets 1 hour outside of his cell for 5 days a week, sometime between the hours of midnight and 2 a.m. There's no sunlight, there's no interaction with other people, there's not really anything to observe. Now, we have become very familiar with the lack of interaction during these unprecedented times. And most of us are going stir crazy, and it's only been 3 weeks. Imagine 365 plus days with no interaction, no TV, no nothing. Day in and day out. Think back to our con law days, where we discuss one's right to practice the religion of their choice. Slide 6. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. It's part of the First Amendment. Not only does society frown upon religious restriction and persecution, but it's against the law and subject to the highest level of scrutiny. Now, what if I added a detail to the hypo? Mr. McGill is an African American man that practices Rastafarianism and refused to cut his dreadlocks. And that is the only reason he was placed in solitary. Placed in solitary for more than 365 days for practicing his religion. I'll say that again. Not because he was a violent offender, not because he had been involved in an altercation, not because he killed another inmate, but because he wanted to practice his religion. Which means Mr. Spady, Miss Perry, and Miss Hussein, you are all in solitary confinement due to a physical characteristic you possess. Lillian Hellum said it well. Since when do you have to agree with people to defend them from injustice? One may not agree with Mr. McGill's religious beliefs, but it is not for us to agree. Slide 7. But to be aware. Speak up and speak out when we see cultural insensitivity and a flat-out disregard to the First Amendment. I ask you to combat cultural insensitivity in any form you see it. Be aware, speak up, and speak out. Remember the golden rule. Slide 8. Treat others how you want to be treated. This doesn't mean you have to lead a protest. It doesn't mean you need to start a movement, unless you feel so inclined to do so. However, it does mean that you should be aware. Make an intentional effort to become knowledgeable and be open to listen about how a well-intentioned act could actually be offensive. Speak up. When you hear people engaging in conversations or actions that you know are culturally insensitive, say something. Hey, that's not cool. Or, we really shouldn't do that because it's offensive. I'll end with this quote. Isidri is prejudice spelled backwards. Either way, it makes no sense. Author unknown. Thank you.